Hey, folks, welcome to Ask Strong Towns Anything. Used to be called office hours. Now we get to say it is about asking strong towns anything and participating in the conversations that follow about these types of questions that we face in each of our own communities. Where I live, we're grappling with many common issues that rhyme with the issues that you're facing in your community. The challenge is that there's always regional or local distinctions, and that's where being able to talk live together with other people about the challenges that you face is really valuable. And today, a topic that certainly needs no defense of the fact that it is challenging is what to do about housing or how to escape the housing trap that we find ourselves in. And to that end, I want to just share that we have a couple of different resources that are now available. And so if you go to strongtowns.org/housing ready, or if you go over to the housingtrap.org site, you'll see two of our main sort of sources of information, but especially that housing ready. I'm teasing this because coming up next week, we're going to be doing a week and a half from now, we'll be doing a large member exclusive event that will be with Chuck and Ali Quinlan and Eric Kronberg, talking about the steps that cities can take to make their places housing ready. It will coincide with the release of a toolkit for city officials, elected officials, technical professionals in communities to be able to take apart their own sort of problem and ask, is there anything that we can do in order to address what's going on? Not just waiting for higher levels of government to pour more money into public projects or simply waiting for the projects that have been shelved due to financial uncertainties, waiting for those to come back online in order to build certain types of housing, but instead to say, how do we unleash a swarm of small scale developers? How do we bring and right size much of our housing supply within our communities? The other thing that I do want to share is that we have a local motive session starting, and this is a bit of program for all of our Strong Towns members. Local motive sessions are starting this spring, March 20th to April 24th on Thursdays in this same time slot. So Thursdays or Wednesdays, we'll have Ask Strong Towns Anything. That's going to continue on. But starting on March 20th through April 24th, the local motive sessions dealing especially with how to take local action is going to be taking place. We've tried to tailor them especially for our members and advocates. There'll be 6 online workshops featuring the stories of people like Amanda Lanata, Bernice Radley, Noah Tang, and others talking about how to sort of establish and deepen and strengthen a movement for change within the community. As a Strong Towns member, you get a 20% discount off the ticket. So March 20th, put it on your calendars. You'll get an email about it. Would love to see you in that, as well as continuing to be part of what we've got going on here. But joining me today is my colleague, Rachel Leonardo, who if you've watched any of the recent YouTube videos that we've been putting out, and especially the YouTube shorts that are really reaching a whole new audience with Strong Towns ideas, that is Rachel Leonardo has become the face of these new videos. She stepped into the shoes of Mike, who was our video guy, and now we've got Rachel doing an amazing job with that. And I want to add Rachel to the conversation to talk about the video, what can members expect from it, but also maybe let's start with that. And then I've got a key question about what your experience has been putting that video together. But take it away, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Norm. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone. It's really nice to get to meet you guys, especially, for me, a lot of our interactions probably take place on your social feeds. So it's really awesome to be able to actually get some one-on-one time with you and actually get to chat a little bit about kind of what goes into making these videos possible. And also, what more importantly, the message that we're trying to continue to spread across North America and beyond. For this video, it's been quite a ride. I mean, housing is a big issue that we're trying to tackle as like across the country, across multiple different countries as well, and figuring out how to tackle this video is very much in parallel to what we are trying to do to figure out how to tackle or approach respond to the housing crisis. So this video really starts breaking down the first steps that we need to take in order to become housing ready as cities. And a lot of the work that you guys do in your towns is really integral to making that first step snowball into something bigger than it is. Um, I hope that that's kind of on brand right,
Yeah.
with where we need to go with this. Just I'm new here, so I don't I'm like encroaching on Norm's space. So any guidance is welcome, Norm. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, you've got something to show us.
I do.
All right,
I do.
take it away.
Um, let me pull it up now. Here.
And while Rachel's
I
doing that, I will say drop questions and comments in the chat. I always say at new member orientations that the chat is sort of like being told in a high school classroom that you're allowed to have your cell phone and do whatever you wish with it. That's definitely the vibe for the chat. So feel free to drop links, share stuff, engage in that way as well. As well as if we have two core questions that we'll take up today related to housing, but then we'll go into broader discussion as well. So if you have other items that you want to drop in, feel free to do so. But go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know how many of you guys are the YouTube watchers, or if you mostly consume our article content, which is also brilliantly written. But I did want to share with you guys today the first minute or so of the video that we'll be dropping next week. I'm really excited about it. I think you guys will like it, and I'm hoping that it starts to spark some more advocacy amongst our colleagues and other people who are parallel to this movement. So please let me know if you can hear it. I'll be checking the chat for that. The housing market is crazy right now.
I'm never going to own a house.
244,900. Except
Housing inflation is dragging a bit, if I can say.
$1,400 for 485 square feet. That is more than my mortgage.
In 237 cities, a so-called starter home is now over $1 million. And I think there's an affordability crisis.
I myself want to buy a home, but I find that the places that would meet my needs either don't exist or are far outside of my price range. I want to understand why. And to do that, I started to read this book to better answer questions today like, why does it seem like housing will never be affordable? What do new housing types look like in our neighborhoods? And how do we actually build them? Will that negatively affect our economy? And most importantly, is there any hope for aspiring homeowners like us?
I hope
So-
there's hope.
That's
What did
the
you,
cliffhanger question.
What stood out as you researched this and prepared to introduce this topic to
Yeah.
a broader audience?
So when I first got into this topic, I think my biggest question coming from, my background, for those who don't know, I studied architecture in school and just recently started my career working in video. And I didn't have a lot of context around how we ended up in the state where housing is seen at this point more as an asset than it is as a shelter. And what was really appalling is how difficult it is to understand how we ended up getting to this point and the level of intricacy that both public and private entities have played in creating this snowball effect of housing as an asset more than a shelter. And that's kind of what sparked a lot of the questions that then followed, which is what we get into more in this video, because I am definitely not an expert or nor as qualified as Chuck or Norm or Edward in speaking on behalf of why the housing is an asset more than a shelter. So we do touch on that briefly in this video, but that as a starting point to me was probably the most shocking, and at the same time, I think it can be taken as a point of paralysis, right? Like it's something that these systems have been built up and developed in a web that's much bigger than you or I, and so trying to tackle it almost feels like we are helpless. But continuing to read through and then using the knowledge that we try to offer to people as resources has well, I'll spoil, I guess, that I am confident that I think that we can overcome a lot of the issues that we have in our current housing. And of course, it's going to be a complex, and there's a lot of steps that need to be taken in order for us to feel like this ball is rolling. But none of this is really out of our reach, and that has been like the core element that I keep coming back to when talking about this subject in this video, and also in internal and external meetings with people on our team and friends and family.
And this is maybe more just as members on the question of, as we support what the Strong Towns movement is capable of doing and sort of seeing these things begin to take place. Can you describe, like, what is the impact of a video like this? And I mean, because sometimes I'm still in the mindset when I started following Strong Towns, it was like this niche blog in 2014. And, it was sort of me and a few other folks, it felt. And now all of a sudden I see numbers that just kind of boggle the mind. Any idea on sort of where this will take us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is where it gets a little woo-woo, but video is very much about feeling. The reason that social media is so popular and has so much influence today is because it evokes some sort of an emotion from you, whether that be a meme that makes you laugh, or a piece of news that maybe scares you or makes you feel more sensitive, to things that make you happy that you want to share with others, right? These are all like core human emotions that across the world we all share. And video is such a powerful medium because we craft stories in a way to help inspire certain emotions for people, right? Housing is such a difficult thing to wrap our heads around in terms of creating more affordable housing, right? So how do we inspire people? How do we show them that this is actually possible? And by crafting a story and using evidence as well to back it up, that's something that we definitely need to distinguish between creating content for the sake of creating content versus we are trying to build a movement that will have a lasting impact, as I'm sure all of you are very aware of and feel touched by. And we're really excited to continue to collaborate with you on growing this movement. The video helps reach people who may not even know that they can do something, and it hopefully helps to inspire and incite certain emotions of advocacy and strength, and this idea of growth, and that we are connected with numbers, people, right? To make these ideas come to life, that we can take action on these outside of just the technological realm.
Yeah. I'm going to drop in the chat the response to one of the comments that came up in the chat on the financing and what Muskegon did. But actually, Chuck did a really good video just to explain, even to our own team, like how smaller communities or communities of all sizes can actually use some of the tools that are already within their wheelhouse to be able to cover off the cost for that. In a moment, I can't find it, so I will find it very soon here and definitely post that. But I want to pivot into a question that we received that just like lit up my world, because I was really excited about the way that this person had put together just such a thoughtful question. And then what I like about it is that they've actually already shared this with the members of their city council, with their planning commission. And so I'll touch on the question at first, but I mean, our core challenge is what do we do to provide housing people in places where that housing has become scarce and expensive and hotly contested? I shared in the chat the article that Daniel wrote about the starter home being nearly extinct. And as I've given talks in places like Portland and Seattle, in LA, and also in my region in Vancouver, I've said, no, it's dead as a doornail. It simply does not exist and has been pushed out of the way because of the exclusion of this as a viable path for people to, earn a suitable amount of money developing it, but also be able to not need to earn a massive amount of money in order to be able to afford afford it. This is what we mean when we talk about starter homes. We'll use that language every so often, especially in the new toolkit that is coming forward. And the starter home is something that is modestly sized, so below about 1,000 feet, but chiefly offers the opportunity of ownership to a much larger swath of people. It's sort of the items that you can buy at the dollar store are generally available and attainable to a large number of people, whereas the items in the Gucci store are going to be a lot more expensive and only restricted to a very limited audience. And the question is, what do we need more of? We need more of the thing that we're currently not seeing in our market as an oversimplification of the challenge that we are in. Out of this, Eric Marsh writes, I'm an architect and a resident of a small city in the flatlands of the LA area. With deep sympathy, he says, we recognize many lost their homes in the recent fires and we sympathize with them, but I think it's a big mistake to rebuild in exactly the same way with the same land use patterns. And I would say, incidentally, this is where we look back at how cities and places have responded to natural disasters in the past. And every time we see these emergences of the new thing that begins to take hold, the new opportunities, or there's kind of the recognition if the building has been destroyed, we can now justify building, say, a home with a front yard business, or we can now justify building a duplex where previously a single family home was cited because the market conditions allow it. And the question is, will we see in LA, but also in other areas that are grappling with sometimes the causes of natural disasters, sometimes just economic disasters that begin to unfold in slow and then more steady ways. In these settings, are we actually prepared to allow that complex adaptation of spaces rather than just the thing that we fear here, which is the like for like replacement of exactly the same thing that has got us into this state? He said, I think the best way to help the displaced is to welcome them to be our neighbors, 100%. But he does address densification as a problematic proposal throughout the region. He's saying this particularly in the light of the political context or the sense that many people have, and we'll have a second question on this from Jessica, that really touches on like when development seems to happen or densification occurs, it feels dramatic, it feels forced upon us, and it feels to be at odds with what we should be doing. There's a deep sense of discouragement that we've kind of found ourselves in this situation. And then he shared, I propose the following to our city council and oh, my screen is blocking. There we go. Would like to get your opinion and feedback. So first off, the whole idea of confronting the challenge of a rebuilding project of 10,000 homes, significant amount of devastation occurring in the LA region really focuses the mind on the scope of the challenge, but actually should also provide lessons to so many of our places. How do we respond in these types of circumstances? And a key element of it, and this is something that has been largely ignored for 80, 60, 70, 80 years. And now Strong Towns is trying to lead the campaign to bring this back, that the next increment of development should be allowed by right in every neighborhood in America. This is core to our campaign. It's core to all of the messaging that we have on this front. It's also core to the reason why at Strong Towns, we don't say it's enough for every city to allow backyard cottages. Because actually that is only one of those increments. And if you say we've now instituted a new cap on what is possible, we're just going to be bumping up in high growth areas against those caps rather rapidly. And so what we need to regain is the ability for our neighborhoods to evolve and shift to be much more like organic creatures rather than mechanical systems, where the organic growth in life will happen in unpredicted ways, in unexpected places, will look like the sudden, I like to call it stealth density within our communities, where you wake up one day and somebody has moved in a backyard cottage in your backyard, and they're paying you rent, and you didn't even realize that there was anything going on there. Now, we obviously want that to be somewhat regulated, but the idea is like we need to allow for neighborhoods to just be emerging and evolving because we actually have thousands and thousands of years of evidence to show that that is what it takes for cities to be able to thrive. And so this is not just a new proposal, it's actually an old observation that's newly relevant in our places. Perhaps this is helpful in your discussions in your communities, that no neighborhood should be subject to radical change. The very thing that Eric is touching on when people are really concerned about over densification as an idea that, all of a sudden we go from zero to here, like to massive, from tall, or from sprawl to tall, is a dramatic change. But at the same time, the annoying Strong Towns member says, by the way, on this other side, no neighborhood should be exempt from change. This is also flies in the face of the suburban pattern of development, which is build out entire neighborhoods all at once to a finished state and then allow them to largely remain the same. This is my city. We have 85% of our residential lands are devoted to single family housing up until just this past June, when the province actually began to oblige the city to allow for new types of housing choices within our neighborhoods. The thing that was the easiest to build in our city that we needed the least of was single detached houses. And most often what was happening was a like for like replacement, so that you would take a small 800 to 1200 square foot house, knock that down, put up a large home for a smaller household. Typically we see this happening all the time, such that many people in a neighborhood experience their neighborhood changing. But the challenge is that change is actually the construction of homes that are just a like for like replacement without, in a state or in a province like we are with a major housing need, without actually seeing any sort of movement towards addressing that need. So the pressure grows as the development is occurring, and yet that change is not suiting the actual sort of market needs of our community, but are very regulated and restricted as to what can actually take place in this space. Out of this, what have we done? We've traded complexity and adaptability for growth and predictability. This is Strong Towns 101, but I want to preface this by then being able to go into the recognition that we need to commit fully to housing lands. And we'll touch on the way that Eric's proposal to his council, you're going to see, I'm sort of teasing it, but in a moment, like, he nails it. He just gets it. And I think this is something that's really exciting to see in the voices of Strong Towns members really outlining these core things. One element of this that is so essential is that we commit fully to housing lands. That is places that we have devoted to housing, and I would say broadly housing in that sense of being suitable for human habitat, which also involves retail, also involves workplaces, those types of things, that if we have said, it's not going to be a swamp, it's not going to be a forest, it's not going to be a farm field, then we should really be understanding this as urban land. And if it is urban land with urban servicing, we should expect gradual adaptation, modification, and improvement of these spaces. And this is an illustration that my colleague Edward Erfurt put together on how you can fill the gaps within existing the framework of existing housing lands and add a considerable amount of housing without dramatically bulldozing everything or having to simply uproot everybody that lives there because the new 40-story tower has to be dropped into that site. Sort of the sudden dramatic transformation is actually something that has been, I liken it to a pimple or a volcano, is only a consequence of allowing so much pressure to build that finally you get the eruption. Sorry if anybody's eating, but it is that trouble that we find ourselves in. And this is the opposite. Edward just did a very simple sketch of what it would look like, how much housing capacity could actually be genuinely brought into a space like this. And with that would be the corresponding amount of improvement of public services as well. And so if you want to follow up that article, it's a great piece illustrating investment potential in your neighborhood. And what I love about this too, much like what Eric has done in presenting to his council, ideas that are genuinely good ideas. And he says, I, as a resident, he's a trained professional, but still as a resident outside of City Hall's sort of apparatus, am able to bring these things to you. What Edward has done too is saying, here's how you find this little map with all the property lines. And then here's the types of things that you could do. If I do it, it won't look nearly as pretty as this. So I probably have to use technology to create the boxes for me, or else they'll look like my son drew it. But out of it, actually, he's a better artist than I am at this point. So, but you can do these types of things and there could be genuine value from it. Because we can't afford not to. This is a great graph from Urban 3. sorry, it's not a graph at all. It's an illustration of, they did an analysis in Florida in a community of a 3-acre site and compared it to sort of the general productivity of a 78-acre site. So you could take a slightly more compact urban form, more using the housing land with a slightly more robust sort of fabric. No, that's not a 7-story tower. It's not some mega district. It's just homes that I'd like to live in. That looks nice on 0.03 acre parcels. So they've chopped in portions of, or they've made the lot slightly smaller, and as a consequence, actually allowed for a lot more intense development to take place without it feeling intense, so that you could fit 2,600 homes onto that horseshoe trace sitage in that 78 acres. And the question is always, we need to focus not on what's there, but what could emerge when you begin to remove all of the restrictions. If you were to fill out the horseshoe trace area, those 78 acres, in the style of Georgian court buildings, it would have a 14x multiplication in terms of its current value. That also returns 14x to the city coffers. It also provides a much greater capacity for private wealth building within these spaces, rather than it being diluted, being more concentrated. And as a consequence, I would say, no matter how stark you are on the partisan landscape, you will always expect that some element of private wealth is going to then fund public services. Well, if there's 422 million more than there was previously, you can do more. And actually, you can often reduce tax bills, even not as the primary objective, but one of the things that can emerge from this. This is a consequence of really, as Eric says, really addressing, we can't just do what we continue to do over and over and over again and expect the same outcomes. We can't leave our neighborhoods in perpetual adolescence. And yet, if you go and check this development, you would see that it has largely remained the same. It's insulated from change, and it creates sort of this abiding conviction that change is bad and change represents the trouble that is to be avoided, when in fact it is a necessary consequence of maturing and developing our communities. We love teens, but we want them to grow up. We should have the same expectation and conviction for our neighborhoods. And so what did Eric suggest? First, provide pre-approved multifamily building designs in addition to the already existing ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, or backyard cottage pre-approved designs. He said, if we can figure it out for accessory dwelling units or backyard cottages, multifamily building designs, they are being already created by skilled architects. They are already, in many cases, have already gone through the development pipeline in most of our cities, to the point where you could say, if you have previously approved this package, what if we do a quick round of pre-approval review on the part of a city to actually say, was there anything about the project that we just approved that we would rather that a developer not have at the outset? Make that clear, make that available. And more cities are doing this. And this is where it really accords with what Strong Towns is talking about in terms of pre-approved multifamily dwellings. Saying, yeah, I love the framing of this. Say yes to new housing before anyone asks to build it. And we have a ton of more resources on this, on the idea that you can remove the guesswork, remove the uncertainty, and move a lot of projects forward that we already know that we want. And we have confirmed already will fit the site, will work well in the context, suitably house a suitable number of people. And this is something that we could begin to really make happen in way more of our communities. Because we're in a housing trap, we need new tools. Another tool, allow by right the next density level of development for each residential zone for pre-approved plans. This is an interesting one because we say allow the next increment by right. He said one way to hack that is to actually just say, for pre-approved plans, there's always a bonus, or there's always a buffer. Or not a buffer, a bonus, or you get the additional unit if you choose to. And again, for all of the people that are passionate about property rights, none of these things are obligatory, but many of them are optional now, or something that is previously forbidden that is actually available to you. So that if you are in, the zones that we're in my community, that if you pick up the pre-approved building plan, right now you're allowed up to 4 building units on a site. That'll be 5 if you use the pre-approved building plan. Why is that so valuable? It's because the city no longer has to devote so much mental math and sort of the energy to figuring out, is this good development, bad development? Do we like it? Do we not like it? Have the neighbors pitched in? Have they objected? When is my next election? Is this near the people that always make a complaint? Are there any spotted owls in the trees? Like, you can get into such a layer of analysis of every single project. And what Eric is wisely saying is you can actually like approve many of the things that we all are committed in our housing action plans and all of our sort of policy statements. We want these things. Perhaps your city is much like mine, where the official community plan begins with amazing things. I'm like, I want to live in that city. We want a livable, walkable, inviting community. We want people to be able to meet all of their needs. We want people to have work, all of these things. And then all of the bylaws take it all away. It's so deflating to go from like, yes, to no. And it's remarkable that our city leaders continue to do this over and over and over again. We only, in our city, were forced to update our official community plan after 30 years of leaving it as is and just requesting every development to go through this extended begging and pleading process in order to get an exemption. Eric again, allowed by right the next density level of development for each residential zone for pre-approved plans. So very similar to that. Oh, did I switch those up? Allowing small commercial, single story up to 50% of the building footprint within residential zones. This is something that is so essential within our communities. Similarly, allowing residential and commercial zones. It's striking to me that there's still places that don't allow this. This is something where we need to recognize that many of our commercial retail areas should have what we could call fluid zoning. That is, they're able to shift as circumstances change by market requirements. And so for a while, especially in form-based codes where you've got a redevelopment of an existing neighborhood in Norman, Oklahoma, they wanted to improve their streetscape. And so they said, no residences on the ground floor, only shops. And the developers came back to them and said, well, we can find people to buy the residences on the second through fourth stories, but we can't find suitable tenants for the commercial at the ground level because there's nobody else that lives there. There's very little activity, or, the market needs aren't being met yet. Well, what if in that context you say, allowing through a building code application that you can put in convertible residential to commercial units there? That way you allow all of those sites to be sold to residential owners. And if one of them is convinced, hey, I might sell and turn this thing into a game store, or work with a partner to turn this into a doctor's office, that is the type of complex adaptation of spaces that we see all the time. This is why in many places, the doctor's office is in an old, fine home. Why would that happen? Because it was recognizing that fluidity of uses is actually very normal within our communities and something that's really important. And so allowing residential and commercial zones, it's striking that this is not permitted in so many more places. This is, making sure that when we say it's a commercial area, the largest, single most potent objection to allowing more residential is always parking, even though those parking requirements are the thing that prevent the residences from being constructed, and often are the types of circumstances that lead to many people assuming the commercial areas are not walkable, are not suitable for people to live because no one lives there. But you begin to change that fabric, you begin to change that pattern, and it makes a huge difference. Allowing retail and services in residential areas. So what Eric is writing about, I'm just like, yes, we need this to be happening. He said, we already got rid of parking minimums, so no change there. Hats off to Eric, your community. This is something that many other places are still plagued by. Again, if it helps, there's always going to be a market requirement for parking. But that doesn't mean there has to be municipally imposed requirements for parking that don't actually match what the market needs. And that certainly can't account for the differences between hundreds and hundreds of different lots and different contexts within our community. A property owner will assess what their particular site in their particular context will need. Your parking maps don't do that. Your parking maps are dumb, and they're orderly, yes, but they're dumb. They lack the ability to allow for complex adaptation, among many other problems that we see. And I do want to acknowledge as well the recent death of Donald Shoup, the master of parking, who has really helped so many people to grasp these concepts in a fresh way. And then I said, I love this too. Once a given neighborhood reaches a certain density of new pre-approved or custom designed multifamily buildings, a menu of public amenities becomes available for residents to choose from. This is interesting, isn't it? And it's quite striking. In my city, new development has to provide community amenity contributions, but it's often done in a way that's very scattered. Each project has to propose what they're going to give to the community. In one case, it's a field hockey field for the field hockey team because they managed to twist the mayor's ear. In other cases, it's money in lieu, so that way it goes towards some large, expensive project that we will do one day. And in this, what he's saying is like, no, this is actually saying there are core things. So long as we keep our vision low, it'll be a simple dog park, or it'll be a simple sort of amenity. We'll improve the streetscape. This actually has a lot of similarities with parking benefit districts and all of the relationships there. But he says, let this be the thing that takes place. And this is where there's a great old article on the Strongtown site talking about the party analogy. And it asks the question, in suburban development patterns, is there any benefit to having new people show up? After all, the roads are already paid for and put in place. All of the sewage is as at the state that it will be best at. All of your parks are in their best state, except for waiting for the trees to grow if you've planted any. Out of that, the question of what do new entrants bring to the table is actually very little. If you've built your entire neighborhood all at once to a finished state, then why would you touch a thing? And so, like a party, if somebody shows up but they don't bring anything along with them, you would say, like, why would we do that? Let's close the doors. Now we've got a good party. But if your place is a good party, it means that every time that someone shows up, more things are added to the menu of amenities that we get to enjoy. More things are tangibly improved in your place, where all of a sudden you realize, now I live in a richer, thicker, more textured place, and we're all better off for it. And so what Eric is asking is really, in whether knowingly or not, guided. It's much like the analogy that we use for a good party really breaking out. And this is actually something that we illustrate in the idea of the traditional development pattern versus the suburban development pattern. In the traditional development pattern, you would see the initial work of private investment, of building a train stop, platting a town, purchasing land and then subdividing it and making it available to new private owners. And then over time, you would begin to add in different types of public services. But you certainly wouldn't be paving the streets on day one. You certainly wouldn't be installing all of the pipe for the entire sort of master planned area. You're just doing very simple things. Platting a town is very simple. Installing all of the pipes and sewer is not. And so you would even see simple things like, for rainwater, we're going to manage it with ditches rather than with in-ground piping, all of these different types of layers. And the consequence is that public investment follows the private investment that takes place. In contrast, the suburban experiment is very different. Upfront, commit incredible amounts of money to the development of new neighborhoods, to the development of build it and they will come sort of speculative investments, all of the activity, and often oversized on the grounds that we should build this and build it once. And so we should anticipate, as we saw in Ottawa, for example, just a community outside of Ottawa, they were anticipating 50 years of sewage and water needs. And that's why they were supersizing all of their pipes and all of their infrastructure. Again, very efficient, but actually very unreliable, because what if your projections are wrong? What if your investment does not recoup the amount of cost that's needed? And we see this where a Walmart emerges and you get some fast food, the housing subdivision gets built, things begin to take a turn. Walmart moves away to a fresher neighborhood, the newer one, and all of a sudden you've never actually reached the level of necessary private investment to have justified the amount of public investment that went into it. And our cities have done this all the time. And so this is the contrast. We urge places to really be mindful of this. And this is where he said, once you reach a certain density, once a certain amount of private investment has occurred, then public amenities become available. Park upgrades, street tree or street lighting, or even just having these things in the first place, but street lighting improvements, public right-of-way landscaping, very similar to the idea of the parking benefits district, that as more participants share in this, we begin to see more benefit emerge from it. And this would give new residents an incentive to not block new development. Obviously, he says exactly how these measures get implemented is an open question, but it's moments like these that foster or that faster change can occur. And so that was a bit of a long haul. So I have a question for all you all, and don't be shy. What do you think? Eric has proposed this. Is this something that you would feel comfortable asking your community? And maybe as an element of it, are there areas that you say wouldn't be a good fit for your place or maybe are just perfect? Anybody want to bravely volunteer as our first contributor?
What we see around here in Sarasota often in complaints of density is transportation. I didn't see a lot touching on transportation, where transit-oriented development sounds great, but which comes first, the chicken or the egg? If transit is not popular in an area, how do you get people behind it? That seems to be it's a blockage to allowing density. We have all the old parking rules here in Sarasota. We have density rules that, whether they're written or not, I don't know, but in talking to builders, that's what happens when they want to build a 400 unit apartment building downtown. They can't do it, but they can build 150 luxury units with a third of the block being taken up with a parking garage. So anyway, transportation seems to be a sticking point in all this.
Yeah. Well, I'll offer a quick thought on it too, is that the one of the core assumptions is that the state of a city is measured by how easy it is to move through it. When actually, from the earliest days of a brothel owner and a saloon owner, the idea was how likely is it that somebody will take notice and stop? And so congestion is the wrong framework from which many people begin. Now, there is a deep sort of inherent, like, quiet means my vehicle moving rapidly through a place, but not having to contend with too many other vehicles, because congestion of bicycles is, might be happening in Copenhagen, might be happening in Rotterdam, but otherwise, I think we're a long ways away from that, of just too many bikes around. But too many cars is something that we have seen all over our communities. And so I understand there is an element that, like, transportation and land use are so integrally linked. And this is, aligning transportation with a strong towns approach is really valuable. But I've also tried to take the angle with people that are opposed to new development in our community, which is a suburban, bedroom community. I've said, so you're explaining that the transportation problem that we currently have is really bad, right? And they're like, yeah, like I can't get out of town most days. And I'm like, well, you're here, so you obviously did. But I try not to be snarky. But an element of it is then, so if this is the problem and you're concerned that the addition of new housing is just going to make it worse, what if we began to change some of our assumptions about transportation? Not necessarily land use, because land use has got you, like, this land use pattern has got you into this transportation pickle. And so if we know that we have a transportation pickle to deal with, what if we begin to actually address the transportation needs that will look like mode shift, that will look like, or that's too technical of a term for a lot of, that just looks like a few less people driving and being encouraged to do other things. And the other element of it is when you say, like, people will only rationally decide not to use the main drag as their main primary thoroughfare to get to all of their needs, when they have, one, a few alternatives, but also two, it just rationally becomes understood that wasn't worth my time. When it becomes understood, like, oh, I took the bus and it actually was virtually the same as being able to move in my private automobile. And that is that challenge that many people will make remarkably rational decisions about their transportation choices. Not everybody. Some people are remarkably irrational, which is how you justify spending $150,000 on four wheels and a bucket of steel. But it is at the same time like an element of just, if I know that downtown, I'm going to have to pay for parking, plus it's going to be, like, complicated to get out of there after the game, I'm going to take transit just on that day. Well, that's already a nod to the fact that people will modify their transportation choices based on that. And then the other thing is that parking requirements are the thing that many people fear in their absence will unleash traffic Carmageddon, but we see the opposite over and over and over again. So that's certainly part of it. Erica, and then Eric, jump in.
Well, I was going to say something else
Okay.
in response to what Danny just talked about with the transportation thing. I've got sort of the opposite problem in my neighborhood in Portland, where the city wants to install a streetcar because they want the infrastructure dollars from the federal government.
Mm.
And there's a big site that they have a plan for, but it seems like they're putting the streetcar and it will be our public dollars going into that streetcar development as a way to address um, infrastructure that they haven't maintained along this
Mm.
thoroughfare. And it seems like they want to build those 7/1s in this new, fresh, finished state kind of thing, rather than letting it's now light industrial mixed use with some residential,
Mhm.
instead of allowing the incremental approach. And it's really disheartening because I love the streetcar. I love
Right.
public transit, but um, I don't think that that's the right way to go about it. And then secondly, I would just add that Vancouver doesn't have a highway through
Mhm.
it, right? But you can still get from Whitehorse to Horseshoe Bay in 45 minutes
Mhm.
via car,
Yeah.
even with all those stoplights and, 2 lanes of traffic in each direction. So,
Yeah. Well, and that is where, like, it doesn't mean by continuing to develop a more sort of robust community network of streets and roads that aren't necessarily all funneling into the highway, using a highway for, if you're on a highway for more than 2 miles, I mean, for under 2 or 3 miles, it's probable that that is a type of trip that would have better been served either with a better transit option, or through a network of neighborhood streets where you're not having to then go on to the thoroughfare in order to get connected to the adjacent neighborhood. Was in Santa Clarita, where they just approved 1,000 unit housing and development, not a single bit of commercial, not a single bit of retail, one park. And the assumption that everybody there actually gets onto the I-5, makes their way up, and then goes to the service area. Well, that's unsustainable, just even at the local level, let alone a missed opportunity for that type of fluid use to say, like, hey, half of the units here, make of them what you want. Well, that would just, that just totally jams the gears of many people's assumptions. But the truth is, like, oftentimes those types of adaptations are going to be beneficial. They will be fruitful. It will look like the small sort of commercial kitchen that pops up in an existing structure, and that happens in part as a response to congestion, so that the congestion of a general area, the perception that I probably need to find ways to meet my needs a little bit closer to home, or make fewer trips out to the farther flung areas, that is actually one of the things that gives rise to the neighborhood plumber, the neighborhood coffee shop, the neighborhood types of things actually being able to compete. In my community, our cost of living is really high, and we do have areas, far east of us, where you can buy slightly cheaper property and then just drive in and service all of the customers here until you can't. In which case, then your local plumber is finally like, oh, I don't have to compete with people that aren't sort of absorbing the same amount of, like, proximity penalties as I have, and actually create the conditions for local ecosystems to emerge. So there's economic development, transportation, and land use genuinely go together. Eric, I would love to hear your thoughts. And thank you, Erica. Great contribution.
Yeah, thanks a lot for going over it. I learned from the discussion and appreciate it. To go back to the transportation and parking issue, yeah, it's a huge issue. Anyone who's ever gone to any community meeting knows that the number one thing that everyone complains about is parking, right? Congestion and parking. So the way I saw that being dealt with, and let me know your thoughts on this, is actually at the level of the pre-approved plans. Because when people talk about parking, what they're really referring to is on-site parking, right? And so street parking is basically quote unquote free, which is a whole other discussion in itself, whether it should be or not. But on-site parking is really what people are complaining about. They want to have as much street parking available as possible, and to have as many people as possible storing their cars on site. So if we had pre-approved multifamily housing plans, the way I see it is, say you have a 4-bedroom or 4-unit plan, you can have mixes of unit types. So you can have, say, 2 1s, 1 2, and 1 3 bedroom. And you can also have different mixes of parking. Now, of course, the parking is going to add a lot of cost. And that's something that then could be factored into the number of amenities that people get. So if you choose the unit plans with more parking, your amenities that you get at the end of the kind of quote unquote development cycle would be less.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
way I saw it being dealt with, but I didn't put that in because it's too much detail, but I don't know. What do you think?
No, that's spot on. I was just listening to a rerun of Donald Troup's interview on the War on Cars podcast. I'm not a war on cars like person. I don't think we need a war on. We have too many wars. But the podcast episode was great, and he actually said residences is one element. He said one of the most effective tools is basically it's a free benefit of a parking space at your workspace. That they found that when they would offer basically the equivalent of a voucher, you can either have a parking space or a voucher for your assigned parking space, basically that you seed that you won't require it. All of a sudden, rates of carpooling went way up. All of the previous efforts to encourage people to carpool and you'll be better off, none of that mattered. But when it was like, hey, you'll get a $500 a month. Or probably wouldn't be $500 a month, but it was like a fairly substantial amount that the company recognized it cost them to make these spaces available. Even in downtown areas, you can rent those spaces that your employees no longer require unless it's free. If it's free, they're like, why would I give it up? And if you come by bike or if you come by transit, if you don't play in that pool, you're sort of like, why is there this exclusive pool that I don't get access to unless I come in with my, my rubber ducky or my rubber dinghy, I should say, with its steel cage. The element of it too. And so what I thought was interesting is that behavior shifts based on incentives. And you're touching on those types of incentives that like, yep, you can have parking up front. Or if we're more discerning about this, we can actually identify these types of things. So I've got a large, there's a new development that's proposed for our core sort of village downtown area. And they are banking on the fact that all of their buyers are going to require 2 parking spaces per unit. I think as they've overbuilt it. To their credit, they are actually future-proofing their building by making the parking garage area in the building, which made it way more complicated to create. They're making them flat so they can be converted. I'm like, at least you're showing some foresight. But you should, I would challenge that math that everybody needs 2 parking spaces. They were convinced of it, but it should be on them to absorb the penalty for that happening, to basically say to the residents, you got fewer amenities because we had to put in all this concrete. And I think there's something really powerful in that. But free on-street parking when private parking is paid just doesn't work. It creates so many of those conditions. And I'll share a link to the parking benefit districts concept. The best thing that came out of Donald Troup's work, well, among many, but Jonathan. Yeah, thank you, Eric. Great.
Thanks.
Something I was thinking about, and to draw Rachel in with the video to kind of circle back to that, what I was thinking of is that with this discussion with Sarasota and density, that the video format may be really good for showing that there's a difference between density and overcrowding.
Yes.
In the same way that strong towns made me think, oh, complexity and complicatedness are not the same thing. You could have a rural house, 2 stories, 1 acre lot, a bunch of houses like that, instead of overcrowding because you have adult children living in the basement or the attic or whatever. And then you could have a 20-story building where it's got hundreds of people, but they've only got lots of room. So just that, it's an idea.
I love that. And I think that's fantastic. Rachel, jump in, and we're at the top of the hour. So I know a few folks might drop off, but we'll wrap up in a moment. Rachel, sort of closing words to you, and then I've got a couple of programming notes. So.
Thank you. Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of the way that we address the idea of density is through compactness, because density is so often correlated with living in a space that tends to feel overcrowded if that's not the kind of lifestyle that you're looking for. And so by readdressing density as something that is you being able to live in close proximity to the goods and amenities and services that directly serve your needs on a daily basis in a very convenient way is looking at building in a compact way. Where I live currently is in northern Spain, and on my weekends, I really enjoy going out to these really small remote towns that have no more than 200 people in them, sometimes even 30. And they are built in a way where there's a central plaza with a few homes around them, and then they're surrounded by vast landscapes where people either farm or they've just been left to as like natural preserves for people to hike on.
Yeah.
I think that if we start to it's definitely a very interesting topic for video, and it's definitely something that I'm sure we will try to explore. There's always so many different things to try and get out in video, and the financial conversation, which I know has been mentioned in the chat here, is something that we are currently discussing for future video as well. But yes, to get to your point, I think that it does make for an interesting topic, especially because it is such a visual thing. You know, you and I are having this conversation right now about what density can look like versus overcrowding. And I'm sure that we have different ideas of even what that means. So video is a great medium to be able to show people um, what is a compact environment that is a small town? What is a compact environment that is a town that is growing? And what is a compact environment, which is probably the most commonly referenced version, is these denser cities like Tokyo and New York City. And there's a lot that we need to be patient with and allow ourselves to give grace to people who see density and compactness predominantly as New York City, and find and help each other create a backlog of places that are compact, that are small towns, and serve the needs of people despite having or without living in major cities.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important when we confront, challenging pushback by individuals to say like, I don't want to live in some like, Soviet city with, massive towers and all of this. And it's so interesting the difference there where I mean, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but like those Soviet cities were master planned to the T. Every element of it was sort of centrally imposed. All of it was centrally financed. There was no room for sort of that murky activity of the lone individual sort of improving a place or finding a new way. And because everything, your housing units were all on a roster and everybody had to pre-qualify. We're advocating for the exact opposite of that. And I think that's something trying to outline the implications of that can be really valuable when people are concerned about prison cities. And I mean, I don't like prison either. I've not had the misfortune to be in prison yet, but I don't want to be. And like, so there's importance in the language that we use. This is where I know we've got to come to the top of or we've past our hour, but I hope you've enjoyed this. We are also, because this is just the second Ask Strong Towns Anything sort of session on the Wednesday, we're taking as much feedback in as we can in order to fine tune and revise it. If you want more, Rachel, make that clear. We can bring you back, Rachel. I said we're going to have to do that after you get your Grammy for urbanist content. And
I would love to come back. No Grammy necessary.
It could be sung content. That would be Asha's beat, and she would get a Grammy for it. But with that, thank you everybody for dropping in for today. Awesome to have you here, and I hope we can keep up the sort of the rhythm of topics that interest you. And as always, go to strongtowns.org/ASTA to drop in your questions, because that'll influence the type of topics that we take up next. With that, have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It was really lovely being here with you all.